Picture a quiet English town torn apart by cruel anonymous letters, secrets exposed, lives ruined. When a woman dies mysteriously, Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster with a knack for truth, steps in. As poisoned pen letters spark fear, a fire destroys evidence and suspicion falls on the innocent, Miss Marple sets a clever trap. But this case tests her like never before. Can she unravel the web of lies before the town breaks? Dive into Miss Marple's untold story, The Case. She almost lost a tale of betrayal, guilt, and one woman's fight for justice. Chapter 1. The Letter from Limtock. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor in St. Mary Mead. The morning sun spilling through the lace curtains. Her small cottage smelled of lavender and freshly baked scones, a tray of which rested on the table, beside her favorite armchair. She was knitting a soft pink scarf, her needles clicking in a steady rhythm, when the postman's knock broke the quiet. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, smoothed her gray skirt, and shuffled to the door in her sensible shoes. The postman, young Tommy Pierce, tipped his cap. "Morning, Miss Marple. Got a letter for you today. Looks important," he handed her. A single envelope, its edges slightly worn, as if it had traveled a long way. "Thank you, Tommy," she said, her blue eyes twinkling. She closed the door and returned to her chair, studying the envelope. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, with a Limtock postmark. Limtock was a market town she'd heard of but never visited, a place of cobbled streets and old stone houses. Far from the gentle hills of St. Mary Mead, curiosity stirred in her chest. She slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener and unfolded the thin paper inside. The letter was from Mrs. Elspeth Dane, a friend from years ago when they'd both attended a gardening club in London. They hadn't spoken in ages, but Miss Marple remembered Elspeth's warm laugh and her love for roses. The letter was short, written in a hurried scrawl that didn't match Elspeth's usual care. It read, "Dear Jane, I hope this finds you well. I'm in Limtock now, and something dreadful is happening. Someone is sending nasty letters, horrible, lying letters to people in town. They're causing such trouble, Jane, and no one knows who's behind it. The police are trying, but they're lost. I thought of you, with your clever way of seeing things. Please, could you come? I know it's a lot to ask, but we need help. Stay with me, of course. I'll explain everything when you arrive. Yours in haste, Elspeth Dane." Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting forgotten. Nasty letters. She'd heard of such things before, poison pen letters, they called them. They were cruel, written to hurt, and frighten, often hiding lies in just enough truth to sting. In a small town like Limtock, where everyone knew everyone, such letters could tear friendships apart, ruin reputations, and sow fear like weeds in a garden. Her fingers tapped the armrest. Elspeth's words, "No one knows who's behind it," code in her mind. That was the puzzle. Someone in Limtock was hiding a dark heart, and Miss Marple's knack for understanding people, for seeing the truth behind their smiles, was being called upon. She rose and crossed to the window, gazing at her neat garden. The roses were in bloom, their petals bright against the green. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where she'd solved many mysteries without ever leaving her village. There was the time young Betty Higgs was accused of stealing from the vicarage. But Miss Marple noticed the gardener's muddy boots and unraveled the real thief. Or the strange case of Mr. Prothero's missing watch, which turned out to be a prank by his own nephew. Each time she'd watched and listened, piecing together clues from the way people talked, the things they didn't say, the glances they shared. Human nature, she often said, was the same everywhere, whether in a sleepy village or a bustling town. But Limtock was different. It wasn't her home. She wouldn't know the families, the old grudges, the secrets whispered over tea. The challenge excited her, but it also made her pause. She was no young detective, charging into danger. She was an elderly spinster with gray hair and a fondness for knitting. Yet her mind was sharp, her memory sharper, and her heart ached for those hurt by this unseen enemy. Elspeth's plea tugged at her. She couldn't say no. Miss Marple returned to her chair and reread the letter. Nasty letters. Horrible lying letters. The words suggested anger, perhaps jealousy or revenge. Whoever wrote them knew Limtock's. People well knew their weaknesses, their fears. She imagined a hand scribbling in the dark, gleeful at the pain each word would cause. The thought made her shiver. She folded the letter and tucked it into her apron pocket. There was no time to waste. She climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom, where a small suitcase sat in the wardrobe. Packing was simple. 2 wool skirts, 3 blouses, a warm cardigan, her best hat, and a pair of sturdy gloves. She added her knitting bag, a notebook, and a pencil. Her Bible, dog-eared from years of reading, went in last. She didn't expect to need it for clues, but its weight was comforting. As she packed, her mind raced. Who in Limtock might write such letters? A lonely soul craving attention? A bitter neighbor settling scores? Or someone clever hiding their tracks with care? Downstairs, she wrote a note to her maid, Lily, explaining she'd be away for a few days. She left instructions for the cat Tinker to be fed and the garden watered. Then she telephoned the station to book a ticket on the noon train to Limtock. The station master, Mr. Cobb, promised to have a taxi waiting at the other end. "On an adventure, Miss Marple," he teased. "Something like that," she replied, smiling. She hung up and checked the clock. There was just enough time for a cup of tea before the taxi arrived. She boiled the kettle, her movements quick but calm. As the tea steeped, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She thought of Elspeth alone. In a town gripped by fear, Miss Marple knew fear could twist people, make them suspicious, unkind. She'd seen it in St. Mary Mead when rumors spread about a stranger in the woods. Turned out to be just old Mr. Giles, sleepwalking again. But the damage was done. Neighbors stopped trusting each other for weeks. The taxi's horn sounded outside. Miss Marple sipped the last of her tea, rinsed the mug, and grabbed her suitcase. She locked the cottage door and stepped into the crisp morning air. The driver, Bert, helped with her bag. He said as they drove to the station, "Heard it's a quiet place. Not much happens there, so I'm told," Miss Marple said, her eyes on the passing fields. Quiet places, she knew, often hid the loudest secrets. At the station, she boarded the train, settling into a window seat. The carriage was half empty, with a young mother and her baby across the aisle and a man in a tweed suit reading a newspaper. Miss Marple took out her knitting, the pink scarf growing stitch by stitch. The train's rhythm was soothing, but her thoughts were busy. She pictured Limtock, a high street with shops, a church with a tall steeple, cottages clustered around, a green. She imagined the people bakers, butchers, teachers, all reading cruel words meant to wound. Who had the time, the nerve to write such things? And why now? Something must have sparked it, a quarrel, a betrayal, a long-buried hurt. She opened her notebook and jotted down what she knew. Poison pen letters. Anonymous. Hurting many. Elspeth scared. Police stuck. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She wrote who, and underlined it. Then why? And underlined that too. The questions were simple, but the answers wouldn't be. She closed the notebook and returned to her knitting, her fingers moving automatically. The baby across the aisle cooed, and the mother smiled at her. Miss Marple smiled back, but her mind was elsewhere. The train rattled on, passing villages and farmland. Miss Marple thought of her last big case in St. Mary Mead, when Mrs. Carter's jewels went missing. Everyone blamed the new maid, but Miss Marple noticed Mrs. Carter's son, Tom, avoiding her eyes at church. A quiet chat with him revealed he'd pawned the jewels to pay a debt. She'd solved it without fuss, and Tom was back on the right path now. But this felt different. The letters weren't about money or theft. They were about pain, giving it, spreading it. That kind of malice was harder to trace. She wondered about Elspeth's life in Limtock. Was she happy there? Did she have enemies? Miss Marple doubted if Elspeth was kind, if a bit nosy. But nosiness could stir trouble. Maybe Elspeth had seen something, heard something, that made her a target. Or maybe the letters weren't personal at all, just a cruel game. Miss Marple's. Needles paused. A game, the idea lingered. Some people enjoyed causing chaos, watching others squirm. She'd met a few like that in her time, never in St. Mary Mead. But in London, at those stuffy dinners where people hid their claws behind polite smiles, the train slowed as it neared Limtock. Miss Marple packed her knitting and notebook, her heart beating a little faster. She was stepping into the unknown, and while she trusted her wits, she knew this case might test her like never before. The station came into view, a small brick building with ivy creeping up its walls. She gathered her things and stepped onto the platform, the air cool and damp. A man in a flat cap waved from a taxi. Miss Marple. "I'm for Mrs. Dane's house." She nodded and climbed in her suitcase at her feet. As the taxi wound through Limtock's narrow streets, she studied the town. It was charming, with stone cottages and flower baskets hanging from lampposts. The high street had a bakery, a butcher, and a post office, just as she'd imagined. But the people hurrying along the pavement looked tense, their heads down, as if afraid to meet each other's eyes. The poison pen letters had done their work. The taxi stopped at a neat house. With a green door, Elspeth Dane stood on the step, her round face pale but smiling. "Jane, you came," she cried, rushing to hug her. "I can't tell you how glad I am." Miss Marple patted her friend's arm. "Let's have some tea, Elspeth, and you can tell me everything." Inside the house was warm, with a fire crackling in the parlor. Ka fussed with the teapot, her hands shaking. "It's awful, Jane," she said, pouring tea. "These letters, they're vicious. They say terrible things. Mrs. Symington, the solicitor's wife, got one saying she was unfaithful. The vicar got one accusing him of stealing church money. Even I got one saying I gossip too much." She blushed. "Maybe I do, but it's not a crime." Miss Marple sipped her tea, listening. "Do the letters look the same? The writing? The paper?" Elspeth nodded. "All typed on cheap paper. The police think it's one person, but they've no clue who. Inspector Graves is trying, but he's young, and this is too much for him." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Typed letters meant no handwriting to trace, but a typewriter could be a clue. "Where do people type things in Limtock?" she asked. "The post office has a typewriter for public use," Elspeth said. "And some offices, like Mr. Symington's, but anyone could own one." Miss Marple nodded, storing the detail away. "Tell me about the town. Elspeth, who's who?" Elspeth settled back, eager to share. She spoke of the vicar, Mr. Price, and his nervous wife. Dr. Griffith, the town doctor, who was kind but overworked. Miss Ginch, the postmistress, who knew everyone's business. And Mrs. Symington, sharp-tongued but respected. Miss Marple listened, her mind sorting names and faces like cards in a deck. Each person was a piece of the puzzle, but none fit yet. As the fire died down, Elspeth's voice grew soft. "I'm scared, Jane. What if it doesn't stop? What if it gets worse?" Miss Marple took her friend's hand. "It won't come to that, my dear. We'll find the truth. But I'll need your help to watch, to listen, to tell me what you see." Elspeth nodded, her eyes bright with trust. "I knew you'd help, Jane. You always do." Miss Marple smiled, but inside she felt a flicker of doubt. This wasn't St. Mary Mead. The stakes were higher, the shadows darker. She'd need all her wits to uncover the truth, and she wasn't sure she had enough. That night, she unpacked her suitcase in Elspeth's guest room, the bed creaking under a patchwork quilt. She opened her notebook and wrote Limtock letters. Typewriter, fear. She paused, then added, "Someone knows too much. Someone wants to hurt." She closed the book and knelt by the bed, saying a quiet prayer for wisdom. Then she climbed under the covers, her mind still turning as the wind whispered. Outside, tomorrow, she'd begin. She'd watch the people of Limtock, listen to their words, and look for the truth hidden in their eyes. The poisoned pen writer was out there, and Miss Marple was determined to find them. But as she drifted to sleep, a small voice in her heart wondered if this time the puzzle might be too hard, the truth too well hidden. For the first time in years, Miss Marple wasn't sure she'd win. Chapter 2. The Poisoned Pen. Miss Jane Marple woke early in Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room. The Limtock dawn painting the sky with soft pinks and golds. The quilt was warm, but the air was chilly, carrying the damp scent of autumn leaves through the cracked window. She lay still for a moment, her mind already turning over the poison pen letters. Their cruelty gnawed at her words, sharp enough to cut through a town's trust, leaving fear in their wake. She rose, dressed in a gray skirt and lavender blouse, and pinned her silver hair into a neat bun. Her sensible shoes tapped softly on the wooden floor as she headed downstairs. Elspeth was in the kitchen, fussing over a teapot. "Morning, Jane," she said, her round face still pale with worry. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Miss Marple replied, settling at the table. The kitchen smelled of toast and bacon, and a plate of scones sat under a cloth. She took a scone, crumbling it absently. "Tell me, Elspeth, have any new letters arrived since you wrote to me?" Elspeth's hands shook as she poured tea. "2 more just yesterday. One to Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, saying she's hiding a shameful secret. Another to Dr. Griffith, accusing him of cheating his patients. It's awful, Jane. People are scared to open their post." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her blue eyes sharp, typed like the others. "Yes, same cheap paper, same ugly words." Elspeth sat heavily, her apron wrinkled. "The police took them, but Inspector Graves says there's no trace of who sent them. No fingerprints, nothing." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing the details. Typed letters meant a typewriter, and typewriters weren't common in every home. The post office had one, Elspeth had said, and perhaps the solicitor's office. She'd need to see where these machines were kept, who could use them. But first, she wanted to feel Limtock's pulse meet its people, hear their voices, watch their eyes. A town in fear revealed much. "If you knew where to look, Elspeth," she said, "is there a gathering today? Somewhere I could meet folks." Elspeth brightened. "The church socials this afternoon. Everyone will be their vicar, doctor, even Miss Ginch from the post office. It's in the parish hall with tea and cakes. It's perfect for you to start poking about." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Poking about is exactly what I'll do." After breakfast, she helped Elspeth clear the dishes, her hands quick despite her age. Then she fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag. The walk to the high street was short, and Limtock unfolded before her. Stone cottages with ivy, a butcher's shop with a red awning, a bakery wafting the scent of fresh bread. The post office stood at the corner, its windows gleaming. She paused, noting the sign, "Public typewriter available." She'd visit later, but now she wanted to see the town's heart. The parish hall was a low brick building beside the church, its steeple piercing the gray sky. Inside, tables were draped with white cloths, laden with teapots, sandwiches, and sponge cakes. Women in aprons bustled about, and men in tweed jackets stood in knots, talking in low voices. The air buzzed with forced cheer, but Miss Marple sensed the strain. Smiles were tight, glances darted, hands clutched teacups too hard. The poisoned pen letters hung over the room like a storm cloud. Elspeth introduced her as my dear friend from St. Mary Mead. And Miss Marple settled into a chair near the tea table, her knitting needles clicking softly. She wore her mildest expression, the one that made people forget she was listening. Her eyes, though, missed nothing. Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, stood by the window, her thin face pale. a handkerchief twisted in her hands. Her husband, Mr. Price, was a tall man with a kind smile, but his eyes were tired as he greeted parishioners. Dr. Griffith, the town doctor, was younger than Miss Marple expected, with dark hair and a brisk manner. He laughed too loudly at a joke, his hands fidgeting with his tie-dot Miss Ginch. The postmistress hovered near the sandwiches, her sharp nose twitching as she eavesdropped. She was a wiry woman, her gray hair pulled tight, her lips pursed. Miss Marple noted her quick glances, the way she lingered near conversations. A nosy sort, she thought. But was she cruel enough to write those letters? Or was she just curious, feeding on the town's gossip? A young woman, Elsie Holland, served tea, her blonde curls bouncing. She was the solicitor's nanny, Elspeth whispered, hired to care for Mr. Symington's 2 boys. Elsie's smile was bright, but her eyes flicked nervously toward Mrs. Symington. A sharp-faced woman in a green dress. Mrs. Symington stood alone, her posture stiff, as if daring anyone to approach. Elspeth had mentioned her letter, the one accusing her of unfaithfulness. Miss Marple watched her closely. Pride, she thought, and anger. But also fear. As the afternoon wore on, Miss Marple sipped tea and chatted with whoever sat near. She spoke of gardening, the weather, anything to put people at ease. Mrs. Price joined her briefly, her voice trembling as she praised the vicar's sermons. He works so hard, she said, her handkerchief crumpling. People don't understand the pressure. Miss Marple nodded, her needles never pausing. Pressure, she thought. Or guilt. Dr. Griffith stopped by, offering a polite bow. Miss Marple, is it? Elspeth says you're visiting. Hope Limtock treats you well. His smile was warm, but his eyes darted to the door as if he wanted to escape. She asked about his practice, and he spoke of long hours, sick children, elderly patients. Never a dull moment, he said, but his laugh was hollow. Miss Marple filed that away to Miss Ginch was bolder, plopping down with a plate of cake. Heard you're from St. Mary Mead, she said, her voice nasal. Small place, like Limtock. Bet you've got your share of secrets there. Her eyes gleamed, hungry for a story. Miss Marple smiled blandly. Oh, we're a quiet lot. Nothing exciting. Miss Ginch snorted, unconvinced, and moved on to another table. Nosy, Miss Marple thought again, but clever. She'd know who got what in the post by the time the social ended. Miss Marple's notebook, tucked in her knitting bag, held a page of names. Mrs. Price nervous, hiding something. Dr. Griffiths tense, overworked. Miss Ginch nosy, watchful. Mrs. Symington angry, proud. Elsie Holland nervous, young. No clear suspect, but threads to tug. She walked back to Elspeth's house, the evening air cool. Her mind sorting impressions like puzzle pieces. At supper. Elspeth served shepherd's pie, the kitchen warm with the oven's heat. Well, Jane, she said, passing the peas. What did you make of them all? Miss Marple chewed thoughtfully. They're frightened, Elspeth. And fear makes people act oddly. Mrs. Price is on edge. Like she's carrying a secret. Dr. Griffith is stretched thin. Maybe the letter hit a nerve. Miss Ginch knows more than she says, but that's her nature. Mrs. Symington is fighting to keep her head high, but she's shaken. Elspeth leaned forward. Do you think one of them wrote the letters? It's too soon to say, Miss Marple said. But someone in that room knows something. I felt it the way they looked at each other, the way they didn't look. Like in St. Mary Mead when Mrs. Carter's jewels went missing. Everyone blamed the maid, but I saw Tom Carter's shifty eyes. It's always in the eyes, Elspeth. Elspeth shivered. To make it sound so simple, Jane. But these letters, they're evil. Miss Marple patted her hand. Evil is just human nature twisted, and humans leave traces even when they try to hide. After supper, they sat by the fire, Miss Marple knitting while Elspeth darned socks. The clock ticked, and the wind rattled the windows. Miss Marple's needles moved steadily, but her thoughts were restless. The letters were clever, no handwriting, no fingerprints. The typewriter was key, but so was the motive. Why hurt so many? Was it one grudge spread wide, or something bigger I need to control to punish? She thought of her village, where small slights grew into big hurts. A snub at a tea party, a whispered rumor. Limtock was the same, just with sharper claws. Asterisk, she opened her notebook. Adding to her list, typewriter post, office, solicitors. Motive revenge, jealousy, power. She underlined power. Some people loved making others squirm, like bullies. In a schoolyard, she remembered a girl in her youth, Clara, who spread lies about a teacher just to watch her cry. Clara's eyes had shone with glee. Did Limtock's writer have those eyes? Elspeth yawned, breaking the silence. Bedtime, Jane? Soon. Miss Marple said, her needles pausing. Tell me, Elspeth, does the post office lock its typewriter at night? Elspeth frowned. I don't think so. It's in a corner for anyone to use. Miss Ginch is there most days, but she leaves at 6. Miss Marple nodded. It's an open typewriter. Meant anyone could sneak in after hours, perhaps, when the street was quiet? She'd check tomorrow. For now, she needed rest. She climbed the stairs, her knees creaking, and settled into the guest room. The bed was soft, the quilt heavy. She opened her Bible, reading a verse about truth and light, then closed her eyes. Praying for clarity, sleep came slowly. She dreamed of letters, their words black and jagged, swirling around a faceless figure. The figure laughed, and Miss Marple woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was dark, the house silent. She lay back, her mind racing. The social had given her a start, but no answers. Tomorrow, she'd dig deep, visit the post office, talk to Mrs. Price. Watch Dr. Griffith. The truth was there, hidden in Limtock's tense smiles and nervous hands. She just had to find it. As dawn crept through the curtains, Miss Marple rose, ready to face the day. The poison pen writer was out there, thinking they were clever, safe. But Miss Marple knew better. No one could hide forever, not from her. Chapter 3. A death in the night. Miss Jane Marple woke to the sound of church bells, their solemn clang echoing through Limtock's quiet streets. The guest room in Mrs. Elspeth Dane's house was chilly, the morning light dim through heavy curtains. She lay still, her mind already sifting through yesterday's church social, the tense smiles, the nervous glances, the poison pen letters casting a shadow over everyone. Mrs. Price's trembling hands, Dr. Griffith's forced laugh, Miss Ginch's prying eyes, they all lingered in her thoughts, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. She rose, dressed in a navy skirt and cream blouse, and pinned her gray hair neatly. Her sensible shoes clicked on the stairs as she descended to the kitchen. Elspeth was at the stove, stirring porridge, her face more drawn than yesterday. Morning, Jane, she said, her voice tight. Something's happened. Heard it from the milkman just now. Mrs. Symington's, she's dead. Miss Marple's heart sank. Dead? How? She sat at the table, her hands folding automatically around a teacup. Elspeth slid toward her. Found this morning in her parlor, Elspeth said, her eyes wide. It's an empty vial of sleeping draught beside her, and one of those awful letters. The milkman said it looked like she took her own life, but no one's sure. The whole town's buzzing. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on the cup. Mrs. Symington, the solicitor's wife, is proud and sharp-tongued, accused of unfaithfulness in a poison pen letter. She'd stood alone at the social, her green dress stiff with defiance. Suicide. Seemed unlikely. That woman had fire in her. What did the letter say? Miss Marple asked. Elspeth shook her head. The milkman didn't know. Inspector Graves is at the house now, and the doctor's been called. Oh, Jane, it's dreadful. First the letters, now this. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Oh, a death changed everything. If Mrs. Symington took her own life, the letter's cruelty had pushed her too far. But if it wasn't suicide? She set the cup down. I need to see the house, Elspeth. Not to pry, but to understand. Can we walk there? Elspeth nodded, her hands twisting her apron. It's not far. But, Jane, are you sure? It's a grim business. I'm sure, Miss Marple said, her voice steady. She fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. The air outside was crisp, the sky gray with low clouds. Limtock streets were hushed, but knots of people stood whispering outside the bakery near the post office. Eyes followed Miss Marple and Elspeth as they walked, their steps quick on the cobbled path. The Symington house was a grand stone building, its windows dark, a police constable at the gate. A small crowd lingered across the street, their faces pale. Miss Marple recognized Elsie Holland, the young nanny, her blonde curls hidden under a scarf, her eyes red from crying. Beside her stood Mr. Symington, the solicitor, his face gray, his suit rumpled. He stared at the ground, hands in his pockets. Elspeth approached the constable, a young man with a nervous frown. "This is Miss Marple, my friend," she said. "She's visiting and wants to pay respects." "May we speak to Mr. Symington?" The constable hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment, ma'am. Spectre's inside." He let them through, and Miss Marple stepped onto the gravel path, her eyes scanning the house. The front door was ajar, and she glimpsed a hall with polished wood and a staircase. A faint smell of medicine hung in the air. Mr. Symington looked up as they neared. "Mrs. Dane," he said, his voice flat. "Thank you for coming." His eyes flicked to Miss Marple, curious but dull with shock. "My deepest sympathies," Miss Marple said softly. "I'm Jane Marple, a friend of Elspeth's. I met your wife at the social yesterday. She seemed strong." Mr. Symington's jaw tightened. This doesn't make sense. She wouldn't." He stopped, his voice breaking. Elsie touched his arm, her face crumpling. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. "May I ask if the letter was like the others?" "Typed on cheap paper." Mr. Symington stared, then nodded. "Yes," it said. "Horrible things. I didn't see it until after. The police have it now." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy. "Thank you, Mr. Symington. We won't keep you." She stepped back, letting Elspeth murmur condolences. As they turned to leave, she glanced at the house again. A curtain twitched in an upstairs window, someone watching. One of the boys, perhaps, or a servant. She filed it away. Back on the street, Elspeth whispered, "What do you think, Jane?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "we need to know more about that vial and that letter." She led the way to the high street, her steps purposeful. The crowd had grown, their whispers like bees. She caught fragments: suicide, poor woman, those letters, but kept walking. The police station was a squat building near the church, its door open. Inside, Inspector Graves sat at a desk, his young face lined with strain. A typed letter lay under glass, its words hidden. "Mrs. Dane, Miss Marple," he said, standing. "You've heard, I suppose." "We have," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "A terrible loss." "May I ask about the letter found with Mrs. Symington?" Graves frowned, then sighed. "It's like the others. Typed no signature. Said she couldn't hide her sins. Vile stuff. We're sending it for tests, but the others had no prints." "And the vial?" Miss Marple pressed. "Was it hers?" "Dr. Griffith says she had a prescription for sleeping draught," Graves said. "But the vial's label was smudged, hard to read." "We're checking with the chemist." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A smudged label. That wasn't careless. 'Twas deliberate. Was she found in a natural position, as if she'd sat down and taken it herself? Graves hesitated. She was in a chair, but stiff, like she'd been posed. "The coroner's looking now. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Just curious. In my village, we had a case once sold Mrs. Giles, found with a bottle of tonic. Looked like she drank too much, but her chair was wrong. Too neat. Turned out her nephew tampered with it." She let the story hang, watching Graves's face. He shifted, uneasy. "We're treating it as suicide for now, but we'll know more. After the autopsy, if you'll excuse me, I've work to do." "Course," Miss Marple said, nodding. She and Elspeth left, the air outside sharp with coming rain. "He's young," she murmured. "Thinks it's simple. It's not." Elspeth clutched her arm. "Do you think someone killed her, Jane?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "we can't assume anything yet." They walked to the post office, where Miss Ginch stood behind the counter, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "Heard about Mrs. Symington?" she said, leaning forward. "Shocking, isn't it? Those letters enough to drive anyone mad?" Miss Marple nodded, her face mild. "Terrible, Miss Ginch. I noticed. Your typewriter here. Is it used often?" Miss Ginch blinked, caught off guard. "The public one. Oh, now and then. Folks type letters, forms. I don't watch it every minute." "Why?" "Just curious," Miss Marple said, smiling. "May I see it?" She stepped to the corner where a battered typewriter sat on a table, its keys worn. She pressed a few, noting the clack, the slight wobble. "Of the E well kept," she said, but her mind noted the open access. Anyone could use it day or night if the door was left unlocked, back at Elspeth's. They ate a quiet lunch of soup and bread. Miss Marple's notebook grew. Mrs. Symington dead, vial smudged, letter cruel. Typewriter, public, unguarded. Graves hasty, Mrs. Details. She underlined stiff, posed. In St. Mary Mead, a body staged to look like suicide had meant murder. Was it the same here? That afternoon she visited the church where Mr. Price was arranging hymnals. His face was haggard, his eyes red. "It's Miss Marple," he said, shaking her hand. "A sad day. Mrs. Symington was a pillar of our community." "She was," Miss Marple said, sitting in a pew. Her letter didn't mention anything specific. Mr. Price flinched. "Only what the police said. Seems shame. It's monstrous. These letters, they've hurt us all." His voice cracked, and Miss Marple saw his fear. His own letter, accusing him of theft, had struck deep. She left the church, her heart heavy. The town was unraveling, and she felt the weight of her task. At Elspeth's, she sat by the fire, knitting a pink scarf, her needles steady but her mind troubled. The autopsy would tell more, but she doubted it would be clear. The smudged vial, the posed body someone, was clever, covering their tracks. She thought of her village, where she'd always found the truth, but Limtock was darker. Its secrets deeper. That night she prayed for wisdom, her Bible open on her lap. The wind howled, and she dreamed of a woman in a green dress, her face pale, a letter burning in her hand. Miss Marple woke, her breath short. The case was slipping from her grasp, and for the first time she feared she might fail. Chapter 4. The web of suspects. Miss Jane Marple woke to a gray dawn, the Limtock air heavy with the promise of rain. Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room was quiet, save for the faint creak of the house settling. Her sleep had been fitful, haunted by images of Mrs. Symington's stiff body, the smudged vial, and the cruel letter that had pushed the town deeper into fear. The poison pen letters were no longer just spiteful words. They were tied to a death, and Miss Marple felt the weight of that truth pressing on her. She rose, dressed in a brown skirt and pale blue blouse, and pinned her gray hair into its usual bun. Her sensible shoes tapped softly as she descended to the kitchen, her mind already sorting the threads of the mystery. Elspeth was at the table, slicing bread, her face pale. "Morning, Jane," she said, her voice low. "The town's in a state. Everyone's talking about Mrs. Symington. Some say she couldn't face the shame of that letter. Others, they're whispering murder." Miss Marple settled across from her, accepting a cup of tea. "And what do you think, Elspeth?" Elspeth's hands shook as she poured. "I don't know, Jane." She was proud, sharp, not the sort to give up, but those letters, they cut deep. "If someone killed her, though?" squealed off, her eyes wide. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her blue eyes sharp. We need facts, not whispers. The autopsy will tell us more, but I must keep watching. Listening. People reveal themselves, Elspeth, even when they try to hide. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a single glance or a hesitant word had often cracked a case. Limtock was different, its secrets buried deeper, but human nature was the same. After breakfast, she fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. "I'd like to visit Mrs. Price today," she said. "And perhaps Dr. Griffith." "They're both shaken, and shaken people let things slip." Elspeth nodded. "Mrs. Price will be at the vicarage, likely. Dr. Griffith's at his surgery most mornings. Be careful, Jane. Folks are jumpy." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'm always careful, my dear." She stepped into the damp morning, the cobbled streets slick underfoot. Limtock was hushed, its shops open but quiet, the usual bustle replaced by wary glances. She passed the post office, noting Miss Jinch's shadow behind the counter, and made her way to the vicarage, a stone house beside the church. Mrs. Price answered the door, her thin face paler than at the social, her eyes red. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling. "How kind of you to call. Come in, please." She led the way to a small parlor, where a fire crackled. The room was tidy but cold, with faded cushions and a worn rug. Mrs. Price offered tea, her hands fumbling with the tray. "I won't stay long," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair, her knitting needles clicking softly. "I wanted to offer my sympathies about Mrs. Symington. Such a shock." Mrs. Price's handkerchief twisted in her lap. "It's awful. She was difficult, but no one deserves that." "Those letters," she stopped, her lips trembling. "They're tearing us apart." Miss Marple nodded, her face gentle. "Yours accused your husband of stealing, didn't it?" "That must be hard." Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "How did you?" "Yes, it's lies, all lies. My husband would never touch church funds. It's a good man, Miss Marple, but people whisper. They stare at us in church." Her voice cracked, and she dabbed her eyes. Miss Marple's needles paused. "People can be cruel," she said. "In my village, we had a rumor about a baker stealing flour. Turned out it was his apprentice, jealous of his success. The truth came out because someone spoke up." "Have you heard anything, Mrs. Price, about who might write these letters?" Mrs. Price shook her head too quickly. "No, nothing. I wish I knew. It's like a ghost, haunting us." Her hands twisted tighter, and Miss Marple noted the fear in her eyes. Not just fear of the letters, but something deeper, personal. She left the vicarage with a polite goodbye, her notebook heavier. Mrs. Price scared, defensive, hiding something. About husband. The rain had started, a light drizzle, and she pulled her hat lower, heading for Dr. Griffith's surgery. The surgery was a narrow building on the high street, its sign faded. Inside, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic, with wooden chairs and a stack of old magazines. A young woman, likely a nurse, greeted her. "Is Dr. Griffith in?" Miss Marple asked, her smile mild. "I'm visiting Mrs. Dane and thought to say hello." The nurse nodded. "He's with a patient, but he'll be free soon. Have a seat." Miss Marple sat, her knitting resuming, her eyes scanning the room. A man with a cough sat across from her, and a mother hushed a fussy child. The door to the consulting room opened, and Dr. Griffith emerged, his dark hair mussed, his tie askew. "Miss Marple," he said, his smile strained. "What brings you here? Not ill, I hope?" "Oh, no," she said, standing. "Just passing. Bye. I wanted to see how you're holding up with all this trouble in town." He led her to his office, a cluttered space with medical books and a desk piled with papers. "It's a mess," he said, sinking into a chair. "Mrs. Symington's death, these letters, it's too much. I got one myself, you know. Said I was cheating patients, overcharging. Utter nonsense, but it stings." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "It must be hard, with your work so demanding. Did you know Mrs. Symington well?" He shifted, his fingers tapping the desk. Not really. She was a patient like most in town. Came to me for headaches, nerves. I gave her that sleeping draft, but I never thought. His voice trailed off and he rubbed his eyes. Miss Marple watched him closely. Her death must weigh on you as her doctor. It does, he said, his voice low. I keep wondering if I missed something. Some sign she was desperate. But she was tough, Miss Marple. Not the sort to break. She nodded, filing away his words. Dr. Griffith guilty, rattled. Close to Mrs. Symington. She thanked him and left, the rain heavier now. Her umbrella shielded her as she walked to the post office, determined to see Miss Ginch. The postmistress was a key figure nose, always watching, with access to the typewriter, inside. The post office was warm, its counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. Miss Ginch looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing. Miss Marple, back again. What's it this time? It's just a chat, Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. Such a sad day, with Mrs. Symington gone. You must hear all the talk working here. Miss? Ginch leaned forward, eager. Oh, I do. Everyone's got a theory. Some say she killed herself, shamed by that letter. Others think someone slipped her that draft. Me, I don't know, but I keep my eyes open. Her voice was smug, her fingers tapping the counter. Miss Marple nodded, glancing at the typewriter in the corner. Busy place, this. That typewriter gets a lot of use, I imagine. Miss Ginch shrugged. Not much. Folks type letters, bills. I don't hover over it. Too much to do. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked to the machine, then back. Miss? Marple smiled. Of course. You're a busy woman. She bought a stamp, lingering to watch Miss Ginch sort mail. The postmistress's hands were quick, her movements precise, but her glances were restless, darting to every customer. Miss Ginch knows too much, says too little. Watches typewriter. Miss Marple added to her notebook as she left. Back at Elspeth's, the kitchen was warm with the smell of stew. Elspeth served lunch, her voice anxious. Well, Jane, any closer to the truth? Miss Marple stirred her stew, thoughtful. Not yet, but I'm learning. Mrs. Price is scared, maybe protecting her husband. Dr. Griffith feels guilty, tied to Mrs. Symington's medicine. Miss Ginch sees everything but shares nothing. They're all threads, Elspeth, but they don't weave together yet. Elspeth sighed. It's like a net catching us all. What if another letter comes? Miss Marple's eyes darkened. Then we'll know the writer isn't done. But I'm watching Elspeth. They'll slip. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a thief's muddy boots had betrayed him. Limtock's writer would leave a trace, a word, a look, a mistake. That afternoon, she sat by the fire, knitting her notebook open. She listed her suspects: Mrs. Price, nervous, loyal; Dr. Griffith, tense, guilty; Miss Ginch, curious; Elsie Holland Young, scared; Mr. Symington, grieving, distant. Each had a reason to be hurt by the letters, but also a chance to write them. Motive was the key: revenge, jealousy, or something colder, like control. She underlined control. In her village, a woman had spread lies to feel powerful, to make others bend. Was Limtock's writer the same? She visited the church again, finding Mr. Price alone, his face weary. Miss Marple, he said, his voice soft. You're kind to keep calling this. It's broken us. She sat in a pew, her knitting in her lap. The letters hurt everyone, Mr. Price. Yours, about the church funds, has it caused trouble? He flinched. It's lies, but people talk. Donations are down. My wife, she's taking it hard. His eyes were desperate, and Miss Marple saw his pain. Mr. Price wounded, honest. She added him to her list, though her heart doubted he was cruel enough. That evening, she and Elspeth ate supper in silence, the rain tapping the windows. Miss Marple's mind churned. The autopsy report was due tomorrow, and she hoped it would clarify Mrs. Symington's death. But her instincts screamed murder: the smudged vial, the posed body, the letter's timing. Someone had planned it. Someone clever. She thought of the typewriter. Its keys worn. Its access open. She'd check the solicitor's office next. See? If their machine matched, as she climbed to bed, her knees ached and doubt crept in. Limtock was a maze. Its people guarded, their secrets locked tight. In St. Mary Mead, she'd always found the truth. But here, it slipped through her fingers. She knelt, praying for strength, her Bible open to a verse about light and darkness. Sleep came slowly, her dreams filled with typed words and a faceless figure laughing in the shadows. The case was testing her, and for the first time, Miss Marple feared she might not be enough. Chapter 5. The second strike. Miss Jane Marple woke to the patter of rain on the window of Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room. The Limtock morning cloaked in mist. Her sleep had been restless, filled with dreams of Mrs. Symington's rigid body and the poisoned pen letters that had torn the town apart. The mystery was a tangle of threads. Mrs. Price's nervous hands, Dr. Griffith's guilty eyes, Miss Ginch's sly glances, and now a death that felt more like murder than suicide. She rose, dressed in a gray skirt and soft pink blouse, and pinned her gray hair into a neat bun. Her sensible shoes tapped as she descended to the kitchen, her mind heavy with the case. Elspeth was at the stove frying eggs, her face pale. "Morning, Jane," she said, her voice shaky. "The autopsy report came in late last night. I heard from the baker's wife. It's not clear. Mrs. Symington died from too much sleeping draught, but they can't say if she took it herself. Or not." Miss Marple settled at the table, accepting a cup of tea. "Inconclusive," she murmured, her blue eyes narrowing. "That's troubling. Smudged vial, opposed body, and now no answers. Someone's been clever, Elspeth." Elspeth slid an egg onto a plate, her hands trembling. "You still think it's murder?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "we must assume nothing. But I don't believe Mrs. Symington was the sort to give up. We need to keep watching." She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a vague clue-like, a misplaced scarf had once led her to a thief. Limtock's clues were murkier, but she'd find them. After breakfast. She fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. "I'm off to the post office again," she said. "Miss Ginch knows more than she says, and that typewriter needs another look." Elspeth frowned. "Be careful, Jane. The town's on edge. I heard another letter arrived yesterday to Dr. Griffith, worse than the last." Miss Marple's heart sank. "What did it say?" "Accused him of poisoning a patient," Elspeth whispered. "He's furious, but scared too. People are avoiding his surgery now." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Another letter targeting Dr. Griffith again. The writer was bold, striking even after a death. She stepped into the rain, her umbrella shielding her, and walked to the post office. The high street was quiet, shops half empty, faces tense. Poisoned pen letters had poisoned trust. And Mrs. Symington's death had made it worse. Inside the post office, Miss Ginch stood behind the counter, sorting mail, her sharp eyes flicking up. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice nasal, "you're a regular now. What's it today?" "Just a stamp," Miss Marple said, her smile mild. "And a chat. Such a sad time with Mrs. Symington gone." "You must hear all the gossip here." Miss Ginch leaned forward, eager. "Oh, plenty. Some say she was shamed into it. Others think someone helped her along. That letter nasty, calling her a sinner. No wonder she broke." Her eyes gleamed, feeding on the drama. Miss Marple nodded, glancing at the typewriter in the corner. "Busy. Place. This. That machine gets used a lot, I bet." Miss Ginch shrugged. "Not really. Letters, forms, nothing exciting. I don't watch it every second." Her tone was casual, but her fingers tapped the counter. Restless, Miss Marple bought. Her stamp, lingering to watch Miss Ginch work. The postmistress's hands were quick, her glances darting to every customer. Miss Ginch nosy sly, knows typewriters use. Miss Marple added to her notebook as she left, the rain heavier now. She headed for Dr. Griffith's surgery, determined. to see how the new letter had hit him. The surgery's waiting room was empty, the air sharp with antiseptic. The nurse, a young woman with tired eyes, greeted her. "Dr. Griffith's in, but he's not himself," she said. "That letter's got him rattled." Miss Marple nodded, settling into a chair, her knitting needles clicking. "I'll wait. Just want to offer a kind word." She watched the door, her mind on Dr. Griffith's guilt, his tie to Mrs. Symington's medicine. When he emerged, his face was haggard, his dark hair unkempt. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice flat. "What brings you back?" "Concern," she said, standing. "I heard about the new letter. It's cruel, accusing you of such things." He led her to his office, shutting the door. "It's worse than cruel," he said, sinking into his chair. "It said I poisoned Mrs. Cleet, an old patient who died last year. Natural causes, I swear. But people talk. My practice is crumbling." His hands shook, and he rubbed his eyes. Miss Marple's needles paused. "You knew Mrs. Symington, too. Did she ever mention the letters before?" He shook his head. "She was private. Came for headaches, nerves. I gave her that draft, but I never thought she'd—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "I feel responsible, Miss Marple." Watched him closely, Dr. Griffith scared. "Guilty. Targeted twice." "Why?" "You're not to blame," she said gently. "Someone wants to hurt you, and others. We'll find them." She left her heart heavy. The letters were relentless, and Dr. Griffith was cracking under their weight. Back on the street, she walked to the church, hoping to find Mrs. Price. The vicarage was quiet. But Mrs. Price answered the door, her face pale, her handkerchief crumpled. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice faint. "Come in." They sat in the cold parlor, the fire low. "I'm so sorry about all this," Miss Marple said. "The letters, now Mrs. Symington, it's too much." Mrs. Price nodded, her eyes wet. "It's breaking us. My husband's letter people still whisper. And now Dr. Griffith's new one. Who's doing this?" Miss Marple leaned forward. "Have you seen anything odd, Mrs. Price? At church? In town? Someone angry? Sneaky?" Mrs. Price shook her head, her hands twisting. "No, nothing. I wish I could help." Her voice was too quick, her eyes darting away. Mrs. Price hiding something, scared? Protecting who? Miss Marple added to her notebook, her suspicions growing as she left the vicarage. The rain stopped, but the air was thick with unease. She was halfway to Elspeth's when a shout broke the silence. "Fire!" Someone yelled, and she turned to see smoke rising from the high street. People ran toward Dr. Griffith's surgery, where flames licked the windows. Miss Marple hurried. Closer, her heart pounding. A crowd gathered, shouting as two men dragged a hose from the fire brigade. Inspector Graves pushed through, his face grim. "Stay back," he barked. Miss Marple stood at the edge, her eyes scanning the scene. The surgery's front was ablaze, glass shattering in the heat. Dr. Griffith stood across the street, his face ashen, his nurse beside him. "My records," he muttered, "all gone." Miss Marple's mind raced. A fire so soon after the new letter? Too neat, too timed. She edged closer to Graves, her voice low. "Inspector, this isn't chance. Someone wanted those records gone." He glanced at her, startled. "You think arson?" "I think," she said, "you should look closely." She stepped back, watching the crowd. Mrs. Price was there, her face pale, clutching her husband's arm. Miss Ginch stood nearby, her eyes wide but gleaming. Elsie Holland, the nanny, hovered at the back, her scarf slipping. No Mr. Symington likely home, grieving. Miss Marple's notebook grew. Fire surgery records, lost. Letter to Griffith, then this. Planned, the fire was doused by evening. The surgery, a blackened shell. No one was hurt, but the damage was done. Graves found a petrocan nearby, its surface smudged but with faint fingerprints. By nightfall, he arrested Miss Ginch, her prints a match. The town buzz, the postmistress caught. But Miss Marple wasn't convinced. Miss Ginch was nosy, not bold. Arson felt too big for her, too reckless. At Elspeth's supper was quiet, the stew tasteless. "They got her, Jane," Elspeth said. "Miss Ginch behind it all. Can you believe it?" Miss Marple stirred her tea, her face troubled. "I don't, Elspeth. She's curious, not cruel. The prince too easy, like they were left on purpose. Someone's playing a game and we're not at the end." Elspeth's eyes widened. "You think she's innocent?" "I think." Miss Marple said, "We need to see her." The next morning, she visited the police station where Miss Ginch sat in a cell, her face pinched, her hands trembling. Graves allowed a brief talk, standing nearby. "Miss Ginch," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "this is a terrible mess. Did you set that fire?" "No." Miss Ginch hissed, her eyes wild. "I didn't touch that can. Swear, Miss Marple. But I know someone who might have." She glanced at Graves, her voice dropping. "I can't say here." Miss Marple nodded, her heart sinking. Miss Ginch framed, knows a name. The guard ended the visit, and she left, her mind churning. Miss Ginch's fear was real, but her hint was cut short. Who did she suspect? Mrs. Price, with her secrets? Dr. Griffith, breaking under pressure, or someone new, unseen? Back at Elspeth's, she sat by the fire, knitting, her notebook open. The case was not letters, a death, now a fire. She listed clues. Mrs. Symington murder, staged. Fire records gone. Griffith targeted. Ginch framed nose. Something she underlined framed. In St. Mary Mead, a boy had been blamed for stealing apples, but muddy prints led to another. Here, the prints were too convenient. She thought of the typewriter, the letter's cold tone. The writer was bold, striking even after a death, burning evidence to hide their tracks. Motive was still murk revenge, power, or something personal. She recalled a woman in her village spreading lies to punish a rival. Was Limtock's writer settling a score, or just cruel for sport? That night she prayed, her Bible open to a verse about truth. Sleep was slow, her dreams filled with smoke and typed words. The case was slipping, and doubt gnawed at her. She'd always found the truth before, but Limtock's shadows were deep, its secrets stubborn. As dawn broke, she rose, determined to pull the next thread, but a small voice whispered she might be too late. Chapter 6. A glimmer of clarity. Miss Jane Marple woke to the faint chirp of birds outside Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room. The Limtock dawned pale and cold. Her sleep had been broken, haunted by Miss Ginch's trembling voice in the cell, her cryptic hint cut short by the guard. The poison pen letters, Mrs. Symington's death. And now the fire at Dr. Griffith's surgery formed a dark web, and Miss Marple felt its threads tightening around her. She rose, dressed in a charcoal skirt and soft lavender blouse, and pinned her gray hair into a neat bun. Her sensible shoes tapped softly as she descended to the kitchen, her mind wrestling with the case. Elspeth was at the table, buttering toast, her face etched with worry. "Morning, Jane," she said, her voice low. "Any news from the station? Is Miss Ginch really the one?" Miss Marple settled across from her, accepting a cup of tea. "I doubt it, Elspeth." Her fear was real, and she hinted at knowing someone else involved. But she didn't have time to say. She sipped her tea, her blue eyes sharp. "This case is like a tangled skein of wool. Every tug reveals more knots." Elspeth pushed a plate of toast toward her. "What now, then? The town's a mess. People are locking their doors, scared of more letters, more fires." Miss Marple spread jam on her toast, thoughtful. "We go back to the start. The letters, their words, their tone. They're spiteful, but showy, like a performance. I need to see the typewriter again and talk to others, Mrs. Price, perhaps. Elsie Holland. Someone knows more than they're saying." She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a single overheard word had unraveled a theft. Limtock's secrets were deeper, but she'd find the loose thread. After breakfast, she fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. "I'm off to the post office first," she said, "then the vicarage. I'll be back for lunch." Elspeth nodded, her hands twisting her apron. "Be careful, Jane. Folks are jumpy, and Miss Ginch's arrest has them whispering." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'm always careful, my dear." She stepped into the chilly morning, the air damp from yesterday's rain. Limtock's streets were quiet, the high street nearly empty. The post office stood at the corner, its windows fogged. Inside, a young clerk, Elsie Holland, was behind the counter, her blonde curls tied back, her face pale. Miss Ginch's arrest had left the post office short-handed, and Elsie was filling in. "Miss Marple," Elsie said, her voice nervous. "What can I do for you?" "A stamp, please," Miss Marple said, her smile mild. "And a word. You're Mr. Symington's nanny, aren't you? It must be hard with all that's happened." Elsie's hands fumbled with the stamp book. "It's awful. Poor Mrs. Symington. And now Miss Ginch, everyone's saying she did it, but I don't know. She was nosy but cruel. I can't see it." Miss Marple nodded, glancing at the typewriter in the corner. "This place is busy. That machine doesn't get used much." Elsie shrugged, her eyes darting away. "Sometimes letters, forms. I don't pay much mind, but—" She hesitated, then leaned closer. "A few days ago, I saw Mrs. Price here sorting mail. It was odd she doesn't work here, but she was at the typewriter typing something quick." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Mrs. Price? When was this?" "Before the first letter came," Elsie said, her voice low. "I didn't think much of it then, but now—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing. Miss Marple smiled, patting her hand. "Thank you, Elsie. You've been very helpful." She bought her stamp and left her notebook heavier. Elsie saw Mrs. Price at typewriter before letters. Nervous, honest. The vicar's wife was a puzzle, nervous, defensive, now linked to the typewriter. Was she the writer, or just caught in the web? She walked to the vicarage, the church steeple looming through the mist. Mrs. Price answered the door, her thin face paler than before, her eyes red. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling. "Come in. It's kind of you to call." They sat in the cold parlor, the fire barely glowing. Miss Marple took out her knitting, her needles clicking softly. "Such a sad time," she said. "Miss Ginch's arrest must be a shock." Mrs. Price's handkerchief twisted in her lap. "It's terrible. I never thought she'd do such things, letters afire. But the police say her prints were on the petrol can." Miss Marple nodded, her face gentle. "People surprise us. I heard you help at the post office sometimes, sorting mail. That's kind of you." Mrs. Price froze, her eyes wide. "Who told you that?" "I only helped once, when Miss Ginch was short-handed." "It was nothing." Her voice was too quick. Her hands shaking, Miss Marple's needles paused. "Of course, just something I heard." "Did you use the typewriter there?" "No," Mrs. Price said, her voice sharp. "I mean, I might have for a church notice, but nothing else." She stood, her handkerchief falling. "I'm sorry, I have." "Chores." Miss Marple rose, her smile unchanged. "I won't keep you. Thank you, Mrs. Price." She left, her heart racing. Mrs. Price, lying scared, used typewriter. The vicar's wife was hiding something. And Elsie's story placed her at the heart of the mystery. Back at Elspeth's, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, her notebook open. She reviewed the letters, tone spiteful, theatrical, meant to shock. They reminded her of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a jealous seamstress spread rumors to ruin a rival. The seamstress's notes were dramatic, full of flair, like these letters. Was Mrs. Price, with her quiet demeanor and access to the vicarage's own typewriter, playing a similar game? But why? Her husband's letter accused him of theft. She'll write that herself. Elspeth brought tea, her face anxious. "Will Jane, any closer?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, thoughtful. "A step, perhaps." Mrs. Price was seen at the post office typewriter before the letters started. "She denies it, but she's scared. I need to know more about her life, her hurts." Elspeth's eyes widened. "You think she's the one?" "I think Miss Marple said she's a thread to pull. But there's more to untangle." She thought of Dr. Griffith, targeted twice. His surgery burned. Miss Ginch framed with a petrol can. Elsie, nervous but honest. Each was a piece. But the picture was blurry. That afternoon, she visited the solicitor's office, hoping to check their typewriter. Mr. Symington was there, his face gray with grief. But he let her see the machine, a newer model. Its keys crisp, unlike the post office's worn one. She typed a few words, noting the clean strike. Solicitor's typewriter different. Post office or vicarage more likely. She thanked Mr. Symington and left her mind on Mrs. Price. At supper, Elspeth served shepherd's pie, the kitchen warm. "Jane," she said, "you're quiet. What's on your mind?" Miss Marple stirred her peas. "Motive, Elspeth." "The letters are cruel but planned, like a play." Mrs. Price fits access, fear, a lie about the typewriter. "But why hurt her?" "Own husband. It's like a grudge, but spread wide to confuse us." Elspeth shivered. "It's evil, Jane, like a spider spinning a web." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy. "And we're caught in it." But spiders leave trails. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where a liar's careless word had betrayed her. Mrs. Price's quick denial was a clue, but not enough. She needed Mara. Slip, a witness, a mistake. That evening, she sat by the fire, knitting her notebook open. She listed clues. Mrs. Price typewriter, lying. Miss Ginch framed, knows something. Dr. Griffith targeted, records gone. Letters theatrical, cruel. She underlined theatrical. The writer loved the chaos, the fear. In her village, a boy had set a shed ablaze just to watch it burn. Was Limtock's writer the same, thrilling at the town's pain? She thought of the vicarage typewriter, old, like the post office's, its keys worn. If Mrs. Price used it, the letters might match. She'd need to see it, but how? A direct request would raise suspicion. She recalled a trick from St. Mary Mead, where she'd borrowed a ledger to check a thief's handwriting. Perhaps a church event, a typing task, could get her close as she climbed to bed. Her knees ached and doubt crept in. Secrets were stubborn, its people guarded. She'd always found the truth before, but this case tested her. She knelt, praying for clarity, her Bible open to a verse about light and shadows. Sleep was slow, her dreams filled with typed words and a woman's nervous hands. Tomorrow, she'd tug the thread of Mrs. Price, but a small voice whispered she might be pulling the wrong one. Chapter 7. The trapped Miss Jane Marple woke to a soft drizzle outside Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room. The Limtock morning gray and heavy. Her sleep had been restless, filled with thoughts of Mrs. Price's nervous denial and the poisoned pen letters that had shattered the town. The pieces were coming together, Mrs. Price's link to the post office typewriter. Miss Ginch's cryptic hint, the fire that destroyed Dr. Griffith's records, but the picture was still blurry. She rose, dressed in a navy skirt and pale, yellow blouse, and pinned her gray hair into a neat bun. Her sensible shoes tapped as she descended to the kitchen. Her mind set on a plan. Elspeth was at the stove stirring porridge, her face pale. "Morning, Jane," she said, her voice low. "Any closer to catching this monster?" Miss Marple settled at the table, accepting a cup of tea. "Closer, Elspeth. Mrs. Price is hiding something. Her lie about the typewriter is a crack in the wall. I need to see if she breaks under pressure." She sipped her tea, her blue eyes sharp. "I'm thinking of a trap, something to shake the truth loose." Elspeth's eyes widened as she served the porridge. "A trap? Jane, that sounds dangerous." "Not dangerous," Miss Marple said, smiling faintly. "Just clever." In St. Mary Mead, I once spread a rumor that I'd seen a thief's face. The real culprit confessed, scared I knew more. We need to make the letter writer think they're caught. She thought of the letter's theatrical tone, their love of chaos. The writer craved control, but control could be turned against them. After breakfast, she fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. "I'd like you to host a tea party, Elspeth," she said. "Invite Mrs. Price, Dr. Griffith, and Elsie Holland. Tomorrow afternoon, if you can. I'll drop a hint, something to rattle the guilty one." Elspeth nodded, her hands twisting. Her apron. "I'll send notes today." "But what hint, Jane?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I'll say someone saw Mrs. Symington's killer, a witness who's ready to talk. It's not true, but it'll scare the writer. Act hide. Evidence, confess, or slip up. We'll watch." She stepped into the drizzle, her umbrella shielding her, and walked to the high street. Limtock was hushed, its people wary, the air thick with fear. The post office was quiet. Elsie Holland behind the counter, her face pale. "Miss Marple," Elsie said, her voice soft. "No new letters today, thank goodness." "That's a relief," Miss Marple said, buying a stamp. "Elsie, I heard something odd. A witness claims they saw someone at Mrs. Symington's house the night she died. Do you know anything about that?" She watched Elsie's face, testing her reaction. Elsie's eyes widened, her hands fumbling. "A witness? No, I was home with the boys. I didn't see anything." Her voice was honest, her fear real. Miss Marple nodded, satisfied. Elsie wasn't the writer, but the rumor would spread. She visited the church next, finding Mr. Price. "Arranging hymnals, Miss Marple," he said, his face weary. "You're kind to keep calling." "Just checking in," she said, sitting in a pew, her knitting needles clicking. "I heard a rumor. Witness saw someone at Mrs. Symington's that night. Strange, isn't it?" She watched his eyes, but he only looked confused. "A witness? I've heard nothing. My wife's been so upset we barely talk of it." His voice was tired, and Miss Marple believed him. She left her notebook heavier. Mr. Price clueless, genuine. Mrs. Price key back at Elspeth's. She helped write invitations for the tea party, her plan taking shape. The drizzle had stopped and the afternoon was cool, the sky clearing. She walked to Dr. Griffith's temporary officer room above the chemist's, his surgery still a ruin. He was sorting papers, his face haggard. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice flat. "What now?" "Just a visit," she said, settling into a chair, her knitting resuming. "I heard something curious, a witness to Mrs. Symington's death, ready to name names. Have you heard?" His hands froze, his eyes sharp. "A witness? No, nothing. Who'd they see?" His voice was tense, but not guilty. Miss Marple smiled. "Just talk. Probably nonsense. You're invited to Elspeth's tea tomorrow. Will you come?" He nodded, distracted. "If I can." She left, her notebook updated. Dr. Griffith rattled, but not hiding murder. The hint was working, stirring. Unease. Now she needed Mrs. Price to hear it. That evening, Elspeth confirmed the tea party. Mrs. Price, Dr. Griffith, and Elsie Holland would attend. Miss Marple sat by the fire, knitting her mind on the trap. She dropped the witness hint again, loudly, and watched their faces. Mrs. Price was her focus, her lie about the typewriter. Her nervous hands, her access to the vicarage's machine. But doubt lingered. Why target her own husband? Was it a cover, or was someone else pulling the strings? The next day the tea party was set in Elspeth's parlor. The table draped with a lace cloth, plates of scones and sandwiches ready. Miss Marple wore her best hat, her knitting bag at her side. Mrs. Price arrived first, her face pale, her handkerchief crumpled. "Thank you for inviting me," she said, her voice faint. Dr. Griffith came next, his tie askew, his eyes tired. Elsie Holland was last, her curls loose, her smile nervous. Elspeth poured tea, her hand steady despite her nerves. Miss Marple chatted about the weather, her voice light, but her eyes sharp. She waited for the right moment, then leaned forward, her tone casual. Have you heard the latest? They say a witness saw someone at Mrs. Symington's house the night she died. Someone who knows the truth about her death. Mrs. Price's teacup rattled, her face draining of color. A witness, she whispered, her voice breaking. Who? Dr. Griffith frowned, his fingers tapping a saucer. First I've heard of it. Is it true? Elsie's eyes widened, her hands clutching her cup. I heard that too, but I thought it was just talk. Her voice was shaky but honest. Miss Marple shrugged, her needles clicking. Who knows? Rumors spread fast, but if it's true, the police will find out soon. She watched Mrs. Price, whose hands shook so badly. She set her cup down. The vicar's wife stood abruptly. I'm not feeling well. Excuse me? She hurried out, her scarf trailing. Dr. Griffith raised an eyebrow. She's taking it hard. She is, Miss Marple said, her heart racing. Mrs. Price panicked. Guilty? The trap had worked, but now she needed proof. She thanked Elspeth, and the guests, her mind on the next step. That night she told Elspeth her plan to follow Mrs. Price, to see if she'd act on her fear. After supper, Miss Marple slipped out, her coat dark, her hat low. The vicarage was a short walk, its windows glowing. She hid in the garden, the shadows thick, the air cold. Her knees ached, but she stayed still, her eyes on the house. An hour passed. Then the back door creaked open. Mrs. Price emerged, a parcel clutched to her chest, her face pale in the moonlight. Miss Marple followed, her steps silent, keeping to the hedges. Mrs. Price moved quickly, her scarf flapping, heading for the churchyard. The gate squeaked as she entered, and Miss Marple crept closer, her heart pounding. In the shadow of a yew tree, Mrs. Price knelt, digging with her hands. She unearthed a small box. Its lid rusted, and opened it. Miss Marple's eyes widened. Inside were typed letters, their paper cheap, and a vial like the one found with Mrs. Symington. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. Price, what have you got there? Price gasped. The box falling, she collapsed, sobbing. I didn't mean it, Miss Marple. I only wanted to scare them, to make them feel small. I never meant for anyone to die. Miss Marple knelt beside her, her heart heavy. Tell me everything, my dear. It's time for the truth. Mrs. Price's sobs shook her. It was me, the letters. I typed them at the vicarage on our old machine. I was angry, so angry. People judged me, whispered about me, thought I was weak. I wanted them to hurt, to feel ashamed. But Mrs. Symington, she took the draft herself. I didn't know she'd do that. And the fire, I set it to destroy Dr. Griffith's records, to stop him asking about her medicine. I framed. Miss Ginch left the can with her prints. I'm so sorry. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was steady. Why, Mrs. Price? Why hurt your husband, yourself? Mrs. Price's voice broke. To hide it. If everyone got a letter, no one would suspect me. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't. Stop. She buried her face in her hands, her sobs raw. Miss Marple helped her stand the box in her hands. Come, we'll go to Inspector Graves. You must tell him. They walked to the police station, the night cold, Mrs. Price's steps heavy. Miss Marple's heart ached. This wasn't victory, but tragedy. A woman broken by pain, lashing out, destroying lives. At the station, Graves listened, his face grim. Mrs. Price confessed again, her voice dull. Miss Ginch was released, her eyes bitter but relieved. Miss Marple left, her notebook closed, her mind quiet. The trap had worked, but the cost was high. Back at Elspeth's, she sat by the fire, her knitting still. It's over, Elspeth, she said. Mrs. Price wrote the letters, killed Mrs. Symington by mistake, burned the surgery, just confessed. Elspeth's eyes filled. Oh, Jane, how did you know? Miss Marple sighed. Her fear, her Lies, her access to the typewriter. But I almost missed it, Elspeth. I doubted myself. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where truth came easier. Limtock had tested her, nearly broken her. That night, she prayed, her Bible open to a verse about mercy. Sleep came slowly, her dreams free of shadows. The case was solved, but the scars remained, and Miss Marple knew she'd carry them too. Chapter 8. The motive unraveled. Miss Jane Marple woke to a quiet dawn in Mrs. Elspeth Dane's guest room. The Limtock sky pale with streaks of gold. The weight of last night's revelation pressed on her Mrs. Price's tearful confession. In the churchyard, the rusted box of letters and the vial, the truth of the poison pen letters laid bare. The case was solved, but Miss Marple felt no triumph. A woman's pain had torn a town apart, leaving scars that would linger. Her sensible shoes tapped softly as she descended to the kitchen. Her mind heavy with the task ahead, Elspeth was at the table, pouring tea, her face pale but hopeful. "Morning, Jane," she said, her voice soft. "Is it really over?" Miss Marple settled across from her, accepting a cup. She did, Elspeth. She confessed to the letters, the fire, and framing Miss Ginch. Mrs. Symington's death was an accident, but her hands set it in motion. "I'm going to the police station today. I want to hear her story fully to understand why." She sipped her tea, her blue eyes distant. Pain can twist a heart, Elspeth, but this was more than pain. Pushed a plate of toast toward. Her hands trembling. Why would she hurt so many? Her own husband, even. Miss Marple spread butter on her toast, thoughtful. "That's what I need to know." In St. Mary Mead, a woman once lied about a neighbor to settle a grudge. Her anger was small, but it grew, like a weed. Mrs. Price's anger feels deeper, older. I need her motive to make sense of it all. She thought of the letters' cruel, theatrical tone, their need to wound. Mrs. Price had played a dangerous game, and Miss Marple wanted to know what sparked it after breakfast. She fetched her coat, hat, and knitting bag, her notebook tucked inside. "I'll be back by lunch," she said. "Keep the kettle on, Elspeth." Elspeth nodded, her eyes worried. "Be careful, Jane. The town's still reeling. People are angry, scared." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'll be fine, my dear." She stepped into the cool morning, the air crisp, the cobbled streets slick from last night's drizzle. Limtock was stirring, but its usual bustle was gone. Faces were drawn, eyes wary, as if the town itself was grieving. She passed the post office, where Miss Ginch was back at her counter, her sharp eyes bitter but alert. The surgery's blackened shell loomed on the high street, a reminder of Mrs. Price's desperation. At the police station, Inspector Graves greeted her, his young face lined with fatigue. "Miss Marple," he said, standing. "You did it. Mrs. Price's confession, it's all we needed. She's in a cell waiting for the magistrate. Want to see her?" "Yes, please," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "I need to hear her story, Inspector. Not just the facts, but the why." Graves nodded, leading her to a small cell. Mrs. Price sat on a cot, her thin face pale, her eyes red from crying. Her handkerchief was gone, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up, startled. "Miss Marple?" she whispered. "You're here." Miss Marple settled on a stool, her knitting bag at her feet. "I am Mrs. Price. I want to understand. You've told the police what you did, but not why." "Why, right. Those letters, why hurt so many, including your husband?" Mrs. Price's lips trembled, her voice low. "I didn't mean for it to go so far. It started small. Miss Marple, years ago, my husband. He had an affair, a woman in town before. We came to Limtock. I forgave him, or tried to, but it broke something in me. People here, they smiled, called me the vicar's wife, but I saw their eyes. They pitied me, judged me. I felt small, weak." Miss Marple nodded, her face soft. "And the letters?" Mrs. Price's hands twisted. I wanted them to feel small too. Everyone in Limtock, they hid their sins, their lies. Mrs. Symington, so proud. Gossiping about others. Dr. Griffith, acting kind but rushing patience. Miss Ginch, snooping in everyone's mail. I knew their secrets, from church, from talk. I thought if I exposed them, they'd hurt like I did. I typed the letters at the vicarage on our old machine late at night. I used cheap paper, sent them through the post office. It felt powerful. Miss Marple's heart ached. Even your husband's letter, accusing him of theft, Mrs. Price's eyes filled. That was to hide it. If he got one, no one would suspect me. I hated it, Miss Marple. Every word I wrote about him cut me, but I couldn't stop. It was like a fever. And Mrs. Symington? Miss Marple asked, her voice steady. Her death. Mrs. Price's voice broke. An accident, I swear. Her letter called her unfaithful lies, just to shame her. I didn't know she'd take it so hard. She had that sleeping draft from Dr. Griffith, for nerves. She took too much. That night, after reading it. When I heard she was dead, I panicked. I smudged the vial's label, moved her body to look like suicide. I thought it would stop the questions. Miss Marple's needles would have clicked, but her hands were still. And the fire at Dr. Griffith's surgery. Mrs. Price's head bowed. He was asking about the draft, checking his records. I was scared he'd find something, link it to me. I sneaked in at night, poured petrol, lit a match. I took a can from the post office, wiped it, and pressed Miss Ginch's fingers on it when she was asleep at her desk one day. I knew her prints would point to her. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes kind but firm. Why frame Miss Ginch? She was nosy, Mrs. Price said, her voice bitter. Always watching, asking questions. I thought she'd suspect me, so I made her look guilty. I'm so sorry, Miss Marple. I didn't want this death, fire, pain. I just wanted them to feel what I felt. Miss Marple sat back, her heart heavy. Thank you, Mrs. Price. You've told the truth, and that's a start. She rose, her knees aching, and left the cell. Graves was waiting, his face grim. She's broken, he said. We'll charge her malicious letters, arson, manslaughter, for Mrs. Symington. Thanks. To you, Miss Marple. I was wrong about Miss Ginch, about it all. Miss Marple smiled faintly. You're young, Inspector. You'll learn. Just keep looking. Always. She left the station, the air sharp with coming frost. Limtock was waking, its people moving. Slowly, their faces softer, now that the truth was out. She passed the church where Mr. Price stood at the gate, his eyes hollow. He nodded to her, his voice gone, and she nodded back. Her heart aching for him. Back at Elspeth's, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched, her notebook open. She wrote, Mrs. Price letters, fire, framed Ginch. Motive, old pain, need to. Hurt Symington's death, accidental, but staged. She underlined pain. In St. Mary Mead, a man had stolen from his brother, driven by a childhood grudge. Mrs. Price's affair was her grudge, festering until it poisoned her heart. Elspeth brought tea, her face brighter. Jane, you did it. The town's talking. Mrs. Price, the letters all solved. You're a wonder. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. Not a wonder, Elspeth. It's just stubborn. I nearly missed it, you know. Her fear, her lies, they were so quiet, I almost looked past them. This case, it shook me. Elspeth's hand touched hers. But you won. Jane, Limtock can heal now. Miss Marple nodded, but her heart was heavy. Healing would take time. Mrs. Price's pain had spread like a plague, and the town would carry its scars. She thought of Dr. Griffith, rebuilding his practice. Miss Ginch back at her counter, her trust broken. Mr. Symington grieving his wife. Elsie Holland caring for 2 boys without a mother. And Mr. Price facing his wife's betrayal, his faith tested. That afternoon, she walked to the high street, needing air. The post office was busy again. Elsie helping Miss Ginch, their voices light. The surgery's ruins were being cleared, men hauling charred wood. Dr. Griffith stood nearby, his face tired but hopeful. "Miss Marple," he said, nodding, "you saved us." "Thank you." She smiled. "You'll rebuild, Doctor. People need you." He nodded, and she walked on, her steps slow. The church bells rang, calling for evening service, and she paused, listening. Limtock was mending, but it would never be the same. At supper, Elspeth served stew, the kitchen warm. "When will you go home, Jane?" she asked. "You've done so much." "Soon," Miss Marple said, stirring her stew. "A day or two to be sure the town's steady. I'll write to you, Elspeth, and you must visit St. Mary Mead." Elspeth smiled. "I will. You've given me courage, Jane." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but her heart was quiet. Courage was what Limtock needed now, and truth. She'd given them both, but at a cost. That night she sat by the fire, knitting a pink scarf, her notebook closed. She thought of Mrs. Price's broken voice, her pain laid bare. Human nature, she knew, was frail, capable of great harm. But it was also resilient, able to heal. She prayed before bed, her Bible open to a verse about forgiveness. Sleep came easier, her dreams free of shadows. The case was done, but its lessons lingered about pain, about truth, about the strength to face both. Tomorrow, she'd help Elspeth plan a church tea to bring the town together. Limtock would rise, and Miss Marple would carry its story home, a reminder of the case she nearly lost. Chapter 9. Reflections by the Fire. Miss Jane Marple sat by the fireplace in her cozy parlor in St. Mary Mead. The crackle of logs a comforting hum after the turmoil of Limtock. The train journey home had been quiet, the fields and villages blurring past her window, but her mind had stayed on Mrs. Price's tearful confession. The poisoned pen letters and the town left to heal. Her small cottage smelled of lavender and polished wood, and a tray of scones, baked by her maid Lily, rested on the table beside her favorite armchair. She held her knitting, a soft pink scarf growing stitch by stitch. But her hands were slow, her thoughts heavy with the case she'd nearly lost. The clock ticked, marking the late afternoon of her first day back. And outside, the autumn leaves swirled in a gentle breeze. She leaned back, her blue eyes tracing the familiar room-lace curtains. A bookshelf crammed with novels and her worn Bible. A photo of her nephew Raymond on the mantel. St. Mary Mead was home, its rhythms steady, its people known. Yet Limtock had shaken her, testing her sharp mind and quiet faith. She'd solved the mystery, but the cost lingered. Mrs. Symington's death, Dr. Griffith's ruined surgery, Miss Ginch's false arrest, and Mrs. Price's broken life. Each was a scar, and Miss Marple felt them as if they were her own. Her knitting needles paused as she thought of Mrs. Price. Sobbing in the churchyard, her rusted box of letters, and the vial a confession of her pain. The motive an old affair, a husband's betrayal. Years of feeling small had driven her to lash out, to make others hurt as she did. Miss Marple understood pain. She'd seen it in St. Mary Mead, in the eyes of a widow cheated by a friend, or a child mocked for a stammer. But Mrs. Price's pain had twisted into cruelty, spreading like a weed until it choked a town. Miss Marple sighed, her heart heavy. Human nature was frail, capable of such harm, yet also of healing, if given time and truth. She rose, her knees creaking, and crossed to her writing desk. A blank sheet of paper waited, and she took her pen. Determined to write to Elspeth Dane. The letter would be brief, a promise to keep in touch, a hope for Limtock's recovery. She dipped the pen in ink and began. "Dear Elspeth, I'm home in St. Mary Mead, settled by my fire. Limtock feels far away, but not forgotten. You were brave, my dear, and your town will mend. People are strong even after such pain, but they must face the truth first. Write to me soon, and come visit when you can. My garden needs your touch. Yours fondly, Jane Marple." She folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and set it aside for the morning post. The act felt final, a closing of the Limtock chapter, but her mind lingered on the case. She returned to her chair, her knitting resuming, the needles clicking softly. The fire cast shadows on the walls, and she let her thoughts wander. Piecing together what she'd learned, the letters had been clever. Typed on the vicarage's old machine, their words, sharp and theatrical, meant to shock. Mrs. Price had played a role, hiding her anger behind a timid smile, targeting everyone to mask her own guilt. Even her husband's letter accusing him of theft was a ruse to deflect suspicion. Miss Marple had nearly missed it, blinded by the chaos of suspects Dr. Griffith's guilt, Miss Jinch's nosiness, Elsie Holland's nerves. But Mrs. Price's lie about the typewriter, her panic at the tea party, had been the thread that unraveled it all. She thought of St. Mary Mead, where her cases were simpler: stolen brooch, a forged will, a prank gone wrong. There, she'd watch from her garden, listen AT&T, and spot the truth in a glance or a stutter. Limtock was different, its secrets deeper, its pain sharper. She doubted herself, felt the puzzles slipping through her fingers. The smudged vial, the staged body, the fire, they were bold moves, almost too clever for her. Yet her persistence, her quiet watching, had won out. She smiled faintly, her needles steady. She was no detective, just an old woman with a knack for people. But that was enough. The clock chimed 5, and she set her knitting aside, her hands tired. She thought of Limtock's people, rebuilding their lives. Dr. Griffith, working from a new office, his patients returning. Miss Ginch back at her post office counter, her sharp eyes softened by her ordeal. Elsie Holland caring for the Symington boys, her smile brighter now. Mr. Symington grieving but strong for his sons. And Mr. Price facing his wife's betrayal, his faith tested but unbroken. They'd heal, Miss Marple knew, because people did. In St. Mary Mead, a family had mended after a theft. Neighbors had forgiven a lie. Limtock would, too. She rose, crossing to the window, her eyes on her garden. The roses were fading, their petals scattered, but new buds promised spring. She thought of Mrs. Price, locked in a cell. Her life changed forever. Miss Marple felt no anger, only sorrow. Pain had driven her, and pain was human, she recalled. A verse from her Bible about mercy and forgiveness. And resolved to pray for her tonight. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Lily, her maid, poked her head in. Miss Marple, supper's ready. Just soup and bread, but it's warm. Thank you, Lily, Miss Marple said, smiling. She followed to the kitchen, where a small table held a steaming bowl and a crusty loaf. The soup smelled of carrots and herbs, and she ate slowly, her mind still on Limtock. Lily chattered about village news, a new baby. A broken fence, but Miss Marple only half listened, her thoughts far away. After supper, she returned to the parlor, the fire still glowing. She opened her notebook, its pages filled with Limtock's clues. Mrs. Price letters, fire, motive, old pain. Symington, accidental death, staged, Ginch framed, innocent. Typewriter, vicarage, key. She closed it, her fingers tracing the cover. The case had taught her something new about doubt, about the darkness in a quiet heart. She'd faced her limits, felt the fear of failure, but she'd pushed through. That was her strength. She realized not brilliance, but stubbornness, a refusal to let go. She took up her knitting again, the pink scarf nearly done. The needles clicked, a rhythm that soothed her. She thought of Elspeth, her warm kitchen, her courage in calling for help. Limtock would recover, and Elspeth would lead the way, with teas and church events to knit the town back together. Miss Marple smiled, imagining her friend's roses blooming again. The fire dimmed, and she added a log, the flames flaring bright. She thought of her next steps, writing to Elspeth. visiting the vicar here to share news, tending her garden. Life in St. Mary Mead would go on, its small dramas waiting for her sharp eyes. But Limtock had changed her, made her see her own frailty. She wasn't young, her knees ached, her hands trembled sometimes. Yet her mind was clear, her heart steady. And that was enough. She opened her Bible, reading a verse about light overcoming darkness. It fit. She thought Limtock's truth had been dark, but it was out now, and light would follow. She prayed, asking for strength for the town, for Mrs. Price, for herself. Sleep called, but she lingered, her knitting in her lap, her eyes on the fire. The case had been hard, the hardest she'd faced. She'd nearly lost it, nearly walked away, but she hadn't. That was her victory, small but real. She thought of Mrs. Price's eyes, broken but honest at the end. Truth had a cost, but it also freed. Limtock would learn that, and so had she. As the clock struck 9, she rose, her scarf folded neatly. She climbed the stairs, her steps slow, her heart quiet. Tomorrow she'd post her letter, weed her garden, chat with Lily about the village. Life would settle, but Limtock's lessons would stay about pain, about persistence, about the quiet strength of an old woman who refused to give up in her bedroom. She knelt by the bed, her Bible open. She prayed again, her voice soft, then slipped under the quilt. Sleep came quickly, her dreams gentle, filled with roses and firelight. The case she almost lost was behind her, but its truth would guide her forward, a light in the shadows of St. Mary Mead.